Welcome everyone to FMDiSC, May 2022. And my name is Lynn Allen, member of the board and the organizer of this meeting. I want to welcome all of you and to thank our lovely presenters, Russ Kohn, Andy Lacates from Claris will be here later on, and then David Knight is going to have an exploration of the future. We're going to ask during the presentation that you mute your microphones so as we don't get a lot of background chatter. If you want to quickly unmute yourself, just hold down your space bar. It's a cute hint I found a while ago. So without further ado, we're going to introduce Russ Kohn, who's been a FMDiSC member for many years. And we've missed him because he hasn't been around, so we're welcoming him back to talk about the event model and his APIBroker. So take it away, Russ.
Well, thank you very much, Lynn and Dave and everybody else. It's really quite an honor to be asked to present to you guys. I've been keeping my feet very wet in the FileMaker world. And in other places. And so it's very cool to come back and sort of present the perspective that I have. So, you know, when Lewis Carroll wrote The Hunting of the Snark, the captain of the ship carried a map that was really beloved by the crew, for it had absolutely no markings or waypoints. And therefore, they were never lost because they never had any idea where they actually were. And it's my hope that the mental map I'm going to draw and the examples I'm going to show in today's talk be at least as helpful to you in your quest. So as an overview, this is going to be what we're going to talk about today. Let's start with why make files. And for years, I've asked people, Claris, what is a file? Why would I want to make one? Some of you might remember this product back from, what was it, 1985 from Forethought and Neshoba, which is where we all started from, some of us, with this product. And it had came in a beautiful box with an amazing book that was bound. It had interesting tools like the widget and the T-bar, and the software came on this awesome floppy disk that you could put in a floppy drive. And if we reflect back on the journey from there to now and the distance we've traveled, the changes we've seen, the process, the fact that that's continuing might give us the courage to face the ongoing change that we're having. Because as problem solvers, we face inertia and entropy. We have the inertia of our existing solutions, our existing knowledge, our existing approaches, and we're confronted with the ongoing entropy of the world, of our clients' demands, of the technology. I'm going to talk a little bit about the scope of the problem and our tooling options to give some context for how I found myself thinking at the beginning of the pandemic. All right, if I had a green field, how would I approach this space and come up with an idea about it? I mean, and in many cases, you already know much of what I'm going to present. You know, the challenge is how are we going to creatively apply as much of the technology that we know and adapt to the new things that are coming. So out of that, I came up with this event model, which is more of an idea than a specific implementation. I will show you my specific implementation, but many of you are doing very similar things or have thought about doing similar things. And I'm not asking you necessarily to adopt my specific approach, but maybe you'll find something interesting in it. And by extension from that event model, we end up with something I'm calling an APIBroker, which is a centralized place to handle interactions with systems that are maybe outside of the FileMaker environment, or which can be leveraged for specific use cases within the Claris tooling environment. So I'll show some use cases and some examples and discuss them. And I'll then share my thoughts of what that means for the future with what little tea leaf reading I can do with the limited information I've been able to glean from recent announcements. So for a typical project, most of you, I think, are familiar with this sort of idea that we have a simple process, an A to B process. We think it's going to be simple. We build something simple. And I'm sure most of you are already knowing what the next slide is going to look like. You know, we get these highly tensegrous solutions where you twiggle one little piece over here and the whole thing wiggles. We don't know exactly what we can change. Systems become brittle, and we keep trying to figure out how are we going to make systems that are maintainable. I mean, that's just one part of our daily lives. So if we think of an example of the problem space, let's bring it into something more concrete in a sense. So let's say we build a Claris Pro solution that covers some contacts. And let's say in the same file, we put in maybe some invoicing and some shipping. Okay, and we know how to do that, and we're comfortable with doing that. And now we want to build an HR system, but that needs to be in maybe a separate file because we have a different security model involved with it. But we know how to do that, and we know how to connect those things. And now we want to build a Go app that will let people in the field be able to interact with some of this. And you know, we know how to do that, but that's somehow it feels different. It feels like it's something a little bit further away from maybe where we started from. And there's separate considerations for maybe for sync or for just, you know, what if the internet goes down and we have to reconnect, or we can have a different security model and so forth. So if we put that all as the sort of the Claris space, and even within it, there's some divisions, which you can see with the faint line in between. Okay, now we start thinking about the other things we want to connect with. Okay, we need to support shipping, let's say, and maybe we want to integrate with a payroll service and some sort of forms and maybe some externally hosted middleware, and maybe something that we built or someone's building or we have to interact that's over on Amazon. And again, you probably already know what the next piece of this slide is. You know, we have questions about how to do this. And in many ways, we've siloed our information where if we're able to build these things at all, we've done them in different ways. Maybe we've tried Connect to do some of this. Maybe we've used some other third-party solution to do some of this. But it's not like there's a single model for how to think about doing all this. So again, if complexity happens, and if good solutions often need to have a variety of different technologies that are used, and we're confronted with our tendency, which is very natural, to compartmentalize our knowledge, because at some point it's like, is it worth the effort to learn this whole other thing? Is it going to be good for our business to learn this other thing? Is it going to be something I want to do? Maybe I got into FileMaker because I really like the UI aspect, and this seems like more of a heavy lift and more hard code tech, code stuff. I don't really want to go there. So these are all the challenges that we need to worry about. And then the more things that we're using, the more chance there is that scope change, either in what the tooling is able to provide, what the marketplace is doing in the tooling, or what our client and needs are, all can change. And when I say clients, I could refer to third parties that we're actually consulting with, or if you're an internal developer, your own organizational pieces. So all those challenges provide the motivation for coming up with a mental landscape that's simpler. At least that's what I found myself thinking about when I was sitting around during COVID. I'm like, okay, is there a simpler way of handling all this conceptually? So what are the ideal properties of some sort of solution like that? Well, it needs to work. It needs to be resilient. And by that, I mean, once we build it, I don't want to have to worry about it breaking. I want it to be somewhat graceful in how it handles small changes. And if things do change, I want to be somehow notified maybe that change has happened. Needs to be maintainable so that, when I come back to it, or we come back to it, in months or years, that we know what we did and without having to relearn the whole thing. And so there's certain aspects of consistency and adaptability and extensibility and so forth in our code base that would be great to be able to leverage. And it should be as performant as is possible. Although I would argue that in many cases, performance is less important than those other things. Although when you get into certain features and certain things that lots of people touch, then clearly you want to tune for performance. So we're all fairly familiar with, many of these techniques that we can apply that will help us with these things, and we already know a lot. It's just, how do we put it together? How do we leverage what we already know, what is already right in front of us today, to create solutions that will work reliably for a long period of time? So what is our palette of tools, if you will? Well, we've got Pro and Server and Go. To a certain extent, we've got Connect, although that's still maturing. So it's going to be very interesting to see how that moves in the long run. And then we have this new thing that I really don't know much about called Studio, which seems to be an object store with fairly controlled flows to begin with. And I'm unclear on the exact ways it's integrating with Pro. I'm hoping Andy can discuss that a little bit more later. But presumably that model will extend over time and provide a more integrated solution for some of the problem space I'm describing, but it's not here yet today. So we know
highly enough of it that they gave it out as a wedding gift.
We have the let, the while, and the custom function, which are really your friends, I think, in doing a lot of the things that we might want to do. It gives us a huge range of options, and I'll be showing some stuff that can be done with that. We have JSON as a fully fledged object within the FileMaker environment with a rich set of tools that let us manipulate it, which can be applied creatively to help support the kinds of systems I'm talking about. We've got execute SQL, which, as you know, lets us access data from throughout the environment. I'm not going to be focusing on the execute SQL in today's talk, but it's definitely there and can be used. We do have all these third-party web services and APIs that we can interact with and leverage, and we should. And we also have lots of different cloud services like the Amazon stack that solutions can be, parts of solutions can be deployed on and built on. And I'm talking beyond the EC2 virtual machine hosting. So I'm going to talk first about a walkthrough, get into the demos here. What do I mean by an event model, and why do I think it's good? I will say that the design inspiration behind this, to a certain extent, came from the Amazon stack and their context and payload kind of a model for how they exchange data. And I tried to create a simplified version of that would work within the FileMaker environment. And I'm going to, then talk about the scope. So within this, I have a local variable that I call the event object, which is passed everywhere, which we'll get into. I use a collection of custom functions that manipulate it. And I have a very specific flow of control for the scripting. So let's dive in. Oops. And I am going to think of this as a chalk talk at a chalkboard, except I'm horrible when it comes to a tablet with a pencil. I don't know how to use those. So I'm going to have this nice whiteboard here. And we're going to start with kind of at the beginning of stuff that we know, and we'll build up. So if we have a layout in a file, and we have a button on that layout, and it calls a script. And that script does some setup stuff, and it does some complex stuff that takes a bunch of script steps, and then we finalize it. Okay, we know how to do that. And now we do another one. So now we have a different button, and we write a specialized script to attach for it. And again, I'm just building up slowly, stuff that we all know, we've all dealt with 1,000 times. And I need to figure out how to hide my zoom controls here. I'll just move them up there. So I'm copying and pasting from my other screen. So my head probably is moving back and forth. So we know that at this point, since we're doing something complex, we probably want to factor it out, right? We all know how to do that. So we have our setup still happens for A. Then we perform this do complex stuff script, which passes a parameter to indicate the context of what's going on, so it can maybe do something special. And then we take whatever results or errors that might need to happen and we return them. And so then we do something with the result and we finalize it. And we can do the same thing with script B, so that basically we have, these are still, sorry, these buttons are still pointing to the same scripts, but the scripts are now factored in some way. And if we think about what setup is doing, for example, is the user allowed to do this? Is the data in a state where it can be done? Do we need to change any UI to reflect the processing, et cetera? And then finalize, it's like, well, was there an error when we were doing the complex stuff? And so how do we report it and show it to the user? And we record maybe we need to update the state of the found set or do something. And maybe there's other UI updates and maybe we need to update some metrics or something. So, okay, all is well and good with this. So now, we build another layout. Let's say it's in the same file. And it has buttons that are doing very similar things. It's basically the same complex stuff as over here, or very similar complex stuff. But we have to decide, do we want to use the same script A for this button, but maybe pass a different parameter? Or are we going to write a custom script for it? We have to stop and think about how that's going to work. And if you guys are like me, I don't stop and think, I just build the damn thing and then find out a week or two later that I really should have done it the other way and have to redo it. So let's continue the metaphor here. And now we're in a different file, okay, where, we do something. And now can we reuse any of the stuff that we did before? And if so, how are we going to exchange the data between them? Because now we're calling scripts between the files. Is that going to make it easier or harder for us to write and debug it? How tightly connected now are those files? Let's add, let's add a Go, something for Go. And again, what can we use from before? And this keeps going, this sort of complexity. And this is not complicated. I mean, this is very normal for the types of solutions that we're doing.
Russ, we're having trouble
Yes.
hearing you.
Yes, can you hear me now? I thought I turned off my phone, but someone tried to call me on my phone and it interrupted my headset, even though my phone is supposedly not connected to my headphones. So let me disable that.
Okay, yeah.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
And as a result, I copied and pasted the wrong stuff. So we have this layout in, so we have these external systems. So if we zoom out a little bit, we can see that our very simple sort of model has already become kind of complicated. And this gives us a motivation to think about, well, how can we design our scripting environment, our data passing environment and other things in a coherent way where this all feels like it's part of the same thing, whether we're dealing with external systems, Go, different files, APIs, whatever. Is there a way we can make that consistent? So let's maybe, move over to the side over here and sort of recast this in a slightly different way. So if we think about a module rather than a layout or a file, but in this concept, a module might be a collection of layouts, typically in the same file, that are providing related functionality. And in this environment, let's say we have a button handler, which will handle pretty much all the typical actions that happen within that module. and that the button handler would call a function handler, and the function handler would call, whatever specific functions it needs. And if it's a common function, we would have a common function handler. So if we were to draw this out, and I'm sure this idea is not new, but this is the way I like to think of it. So we have, oops. And we have this. So if we do something like this, we have the UI related stuff and the easy early tests and the cleanup and the updates and the go to field at the end of the process and selection and so forth, all happening at the button level. If things are okay, if the early tests pass, it passes on to a function handler, which does the data level stuff. So typically not a lot of UI, if any, but records will get modified and committed, and data changes will happen, and a lot of the back office stuff would happen in the function handler. And the sort of pseudo object oriented model is that if we're doing a common function that we do all over the place, maybe this function handler just needs to pass it on to this common handler, which will do it on behalf of all modules. So that way we can override it when it's something special. If it's not special, it gets handled by the common one. And so just to make that a little bit more visual, let's paste this. Here we have another layout with its button handler, its function handler, any of its special purpose functions. And in this case, so we have the buttons calling the button handler.
Right, so
The button handler calling this. And this way we get the efficiency of having common stuff happening in one place, and anything that's special happens locally. And we have a clean and clear place where we can look for our code because we know where everything is located all the time. And if a button here needs to invoke something that's part of the other module or get some data from the other module, let's say it can do that. So if we now think about, shrink this down a little bit.
Quick question, Russ.
Yes.
It's Jonathan. And so would you tend to do this all then in layouts that are sort of independent from the layouts or the TOs that the layouts that the user interacts with, so that these are effectively sort of context independent where all this is happening, so that you could call
Not at all.
the same function?
Not at all.
So
Not at all.
Okay.
I'm doing this all in highly context-dependent local states because that's what FileMaker really likes to do. And as far as I can tell, there's with limited use cases, the going to that level of abstraction is not necessary. I mean, there definitely are use cases where that's useful. I mean, it's a great question, but in this case, if this was the contacts module, we're on client detail, or I will create special layouts that within the module that only have the data fields, don't have calculations or summaries or other things for speed, just like we would in any other environment. So the functions here might say, go to this layout to do X, Y, and Z and come back, but we're doing that now anyway. So, and I'm not above, doing a portal within a layout in order to do an insert record into the portal rather than assembling a data object and then having code that creates it, although I will be showing how I do that as well.
Okay, thanks.
So everything that's here, the only thing I'm discussing is really a different way of conceptualizing how we work with existing FileMaker stuff. The scripts at this level are going to look very comfortable with the exception of the parameter that's being passed in and then generating local variables. But once you have the local variables, everything else is quite vanilla for an experienced FileMaker developer. So I need to pull up my reference to see where to put the next drawing. Give me 1 sec, please. So I didn't print that out. So, okay, so terrific. That's right. Back to Graphel. Let's close this guy. So let's shrink this down. So let's say we now want to, connect to some stuff like UPS or FedEx or something else. Okay, well, in our current mindset, we would say, all right, I'm going to build a function that's going to go to UPS and maybe a separate function that's going to go to FedEx and a separate function that's go to the Postal Service. And I'm going to write the code in this location here. Sorry, I kind of made that small. And we already know that that's going to be complicated. So we do some research, and let's say we find some third-party API thing that will handle the nuances and constant changes. So for example, ship engine, okay, and ship engine automatically handles this, let's say. So we don't need to sweat the nuanced crap that UPS is doing with their API, which is super robust and probably way more involved than what we need for our particular use case. So we'll let ship engine handle that complexity. And instead, all we need to do is connect, a function to our ship engine and build some sort of interface for handling APIs, with that. But now, the same problem happens. Well, now let's say something in this module also needs to call maybe a different method in ship engine. Let's say we're doing address verification in one module in order to make sure the contact address is, we parse it and validate it. But over here, we're actually going to create a shipping label because maybe this is part of some shipping module. So now we're maintaining 2 sets of code to handle the API and having to maintain it. And that's dealing with all the stuff that needs to happen when you support an API thing. So what if we build a sort of like a special purpose module? Let's move this over a little bit and shrink. That's, whoops, wrong object. Copy and paste. That's an API broker, which is just another FileMaker file with the same sort of, button handlers and function handlers as before, except in this case, we also add, let's call them some broker, API broker connectors, because we might need to customize how that's working. So in that case, we have, a function here might call the function handler in the API broker, and this one might call a different function handler. And in this case, we would have, a connector to ship engine. And in this file, we would hide all the complexity of managing the API connections, dealing with the retries, dealing with the errors, logging everything. So we could look and see every API connection, no matter which file it's coming from, or possibly even what solution it's coming from. They could all share the same APIBroker file. And if in the future, we then wanted to add some sort of, let's say, payroll service through some other thing, well, all we need to do is, build a new broker connection. I made that plural, so that's a separate one. It wouldn't be the same connector that would go to ship engine and our payroll service, but you basically get the idea. And from the application point of view, the interface on the data side is extremely consistent. We maybe just have to change a little bit of the parameter that's being called to pass the right data in the payload, but almost all the complexity is handled at this level, which also gives us the advantage of being able to separate the workload between different members of a team if you need to. As another example, we might want to have a connection to Amazon. let's say. So in this case, and this is a real world example of something I've did where we had a bunch of people that needed IoT devices to connect. And we also had forms that were being collected, which were being hosted on CloudFront. And these are extremely spiky loads, meaning there'd be times when the number of forms that would be submitted might be more than we would want a native FileMaker solution to handle. So by channeling that into the Amazon Web Service API gateway, and then using a Kinesis queue, which would then invoke a piece of custom Python code, we could create the data payload that could go straight into a connector, and we could design that payload to reflect the same JSON structure as an event, which would be coming from within FileMaker. So as far as the rest of the system is concerned, it's as if this came from another FileMaker file. And this FM link could be throttled so that it wouldn't overload the connection to FileMaker. This pattern is something which I'm assuming is what Studio is going to try and address to a certain extent so that we don't have to roll our owns. But it's good to know that we have the ability to do it without that. And then the other advantage of something like this is we could theoretically take advantage of a third-party logging service like CloudWatch so that any of the logging that we might want to do, which it might be more volume than we want to put into separate records within a FileMaker solution, we can push out to an external service. And that could be handled again throughout the whole system if we wanted. So let me see what the next. I think that covers the conceptual side. Let me make sure I didn't miss anything in my drawing. Lynn, are there any questions that I should address at this point?
Not yet.
Okay, so here's sort of an overview, a conceptual overview where, all right, now what would it take to actually do this, right? I mean, we know we can create scripts, we know we can create these functions, but what do they kind of look like? And what is this data object that's being passed around? So let me turn to FileMaker. Let me pull it up. And of course, my Zoom screen is covering. There we go. So here I am in an actual FileMaker file, and I have some custom functions. This layout just, it's got an event call and evolved. This is just a table I built for today's demo, right? And eval is super complicated. It just does basically, an evaluate, and it tests to see if it's JSON, and if it is, it formats it. So there's really nothing magical going on with this. So I have a custom function called context default, which will create a context element that just provides a bunch of information that we may or may not want to refer to in a log or refer to other things in the future. I create this event object using, for example, event init with my function, which contains a JSON object called event, which contains an error, a log level, a request, a response, and a status. And this basic structure is what every single parameter basically, I mean, with some exceptions, but for the most part, any reasonable parameter that's going within this system is going to be using something like this. And again, I'm not necessarily saying you need to build one that does exactly this, but this is sort of the idea that you start off with an event, it has a request, it has a context, so you know where it came from. I don't know who needs to mute. It has a function, which is critical because that's how all routing within the system is going to go. We're going to check to see, hey, what function is being called, and then we're going to act on it. And if there are any parameters that need to be passed, they come in this parameter object. In some cases, that's all we need to do. And then we just respond with either an okay or an error of some sort. In other cases, there might need to be some sort of response data that comes back, and we'll throw it into this. So the consuming script will be able to say, okay, I know where this came from, what the request was, and here's the result of that. Here is an example of a call with some parameters. And I'm doing this explicitly using the JSON. So here I use a let function, and I say the name is an example with parameters. And the parameters are just a very straightforward JSON set element command that has, my param and my param2 with some strings, and then calls my little event init with params function, which again, we now have an example with parameters as the function, and here are the parameters that go across. Here's an example of a like go to layout. So in that case, it's, the layout is that. And this would be passed to, say, a common script, which would be used across the entire solution, independent of what module it's in, because we all know how we would want to do that. Again, any testing of whether we were allowed to do that or not would have already happened before this call was made. Here's one that would, for example, do a go to find. So in this case, we pass, the way I built it is the standard pattern. If you find one record, go to the detail layout. If you find a bunch of records, go to the list layout. If you need to sort it, sort it. And so this just has, what layout, what detail, what field are we searching on, what value are we searching on, and what's the sort. So this is my simplified one that has only a single criteria. I have a little bit more complicated one that handles multiple values. But again, we have the same type of event. It has this function, and here are the parameters to get passed. Here's like handling an error. So in this case, there's actually an errors table in here. There we go, error codes. Oh, I keep doing that. So, I just imported the entire list of errors from FileMaker and then, added some of my own. So you could potentially have your own errors that could be reflected throughout the system. And so, in this case, you can see the error is an unclassified error because it's a 10,005, but the detail is demo error. So here you could put whatever information you want in the response.
Russ, I was just going to comment, a lot of this information is really valuable if you have a bug logging system or something for your users, so that they don't have to record all this, what layout was I on when the error happened, blah, blah, blah. So I think this is really great for thinking about that too.
Yeah, logging and metrics and all this sort of higher order stuff about how people utilize the system can be handled with stuff like this. So if you build your event model architecture such that, for example, every time a basic call gets made, in your function handler, you could update the log with what happened. And that would be at the info level of your log. That's why I support this log level concept in some cases. And then here's an example of just something much more complicated, which is let's use the example of duplicating an invoice where you want to replicate the line items in the invoice. So I built some custom functions that grab the related records or the current found set, but then let you map them to different file, different table, different field name destinations. And I call that a data map. And so the call here is fairly straightforward if you understand the syntax of my particular data map fields. What target layout are we going to be doing the inserts on, and then the data map is just saying take the target layout and the fields, and depending on the current context, it will build this object, which then gets passed because we again are just doing an init with params where we're passing the function name. In this case, the parameter is the data map object, which looks like this. It has a count and it has the records, and so record 1, field 1 has a source, a target, and a value, and field 2 has a source, a target, and a value, and so forth. And I've actually extended this somewhat so we could apply a function to the source value for the target. So bill of materials, for example, you could take the quantity and multiply it by the number so that you end up with the correct number in the destination, and so forth. But point being that this same event model allows for arbitrary complex data to be moved around. So that's sort of the concept of the parameter that's being passed in that picture. So we're passing JSON objects that look like that throughout this whole thing. So now, like, what does this, APIBroker thing kind of do? And again, it's just a FileMaker file. So in this case, if we take a look, for example, at well, let's see. I wonder if I'm eating my own dog food here. Look at that. So here we're calling, I don't know if, is this big enough for people to see? Lynn, is this clear? Or do I need to increase my screen?
It's readable.
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay. So in this case, I'm calling the button handler and I'm passing the event go to. In this case, I'm just going to the, GLTN is get layout table name. I got really tired of typing that all out. And the detail screen. So I think what I'll do is I'll use this as an example to show the script flow. So here's the button handler. So first thing we do is we get the event object. So, oops, wrong one. And it's a bunch of JSON and I could format it so we could see it. Let's, so here's the event. Again, JFE is just JSON format event to save some typing. So this is what basically is being passed, is the go-to function, and we want to go to API layout. And then I have this custom function that's called event params. Let's take a look at our current variable. So right now we don't really have anything other than the event params, but when I call the, this event params a couple times on different things, we now have local variables for layout and function and, error and context and code, stuff we could actually work with. So then back to the script. Well, what function are we doing? Do we need to patch it or do any testing at the button handler level? Well, no, we didn't. So now we're going to go to the function handler. And the function handler is going to grab the locals. I provide a safety measure for myself by basically putting a list of supported functions into a variable so that this code will complain early so that I remember to make sure to put the handler in. If I add the method to a button and forget to come here, it's a problem. So this will warn. Again, is just a convenience method I wrote to find a string in a list. So if it's not in, it'll complain. And so here is an error. This would decorate the error object of the event and then return. It would then log the event and then return the event. So this is what you were talking about, Lynn, earlier, where we'd be able to log an error kind of silently to the user if we wanted to, and then we can go back and see if we had any code problems in our own logs. So now let's go and look for the go-to function. In this case, it's not handled at the module level. It's going to a base function handler because a go-to is something we do everywhere. So there was nothing unique that we needed to do. So I'm just going to quickly go through, and as you can imagine, we have some tests for preventing certain layouts. That's like in this case, if they start with admin, we want to make sure the user has privileges and so forth. Or if it's a developer controlled layout, or so, this is all bespoke. It's depending on your environment, what you want to do. But basically then, we log it. In this case, we're updating a history record. That doesn't need to be in records. It could be local variables on your machine if you prefer. And then all that work to get to the actual step we wanted, which was go to layout.
I have to say, I really love your commenting. That's nice. Alan Poole had a question for you, which is kind of complex. So I'm going to let him ask that. Alan, are you there? You have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it took me a second to move back to my laptop. I really appreciate your taking time to lay this out for us, Russ. And my question is about whether you've explored how this added infrastructure for seemingly simple tasks could have a side benefit to support automated testing. I built something similar once and found that one of the neat advantages, which I didn't explore to its full potential, but I'll just sort of mention it here in case you are exploring it or are interested, was that if at the initial level, like say your button handler script, you log starting context and inputs for the process, and then you also log your subscript reports and ending context. In the log, you can develop a catalog of user patterns,
Exactly.
inputs and outcomes to compare new user behavior against, to compare against outcomes after you've changed a mission critical script, things like that.
Yes, I have thought about it. I haven't actually done it, but it's something that could be done and be relatively straightforward to do. I have done some work with metrics where I simply count how many times different functions get called in order to see how often things get used. We capture the errors and so forth. The pathway analysis that you're talking about and clickstream analysis is frankly not something most of my clients have been willing to pay for. It's something I'm personally interested in. I think it might be fun to talk about some of the different ways of doing it. But certainly, I mean, this whole pattern that I'm describing, independent of my specific implementation, enables all this rich, extra value in how we maintain and manage our systems. At least that's my belief.
You mentioned resiliency and kind of maintainability early on, and I think that extra layer that we're talking about here could really lend itself to those benefits. If you can easily see, oh, this is the reason why this is failing is probably because it deviates from the expected pattern at this point. Anyway,
Yes,
thanks.
I completely agree. So let's get back to what I've shown, which is the question was sort of a perfect segue into kind of what we did. So we have a module button handlers which handle UI and user interaction, initial state checking and whatnot. We have function handlers which override base behavior if necessary or support custom non-common functionality. There's a common function handler to handle basic functions like the go to a layout kind of functionality. We have a common event object, JSON variable that's passed everywhere. We have some functions that can create the local variables from the JSON so that we can work with them in a very comfortable way. We're not constantly extracting stuff out of the JSON. We always get the data out of the JSON in the same way. And within the event object, the function value drives the routing. The request contains, the information that we need to handle. The response might contain some results, and we have an error that we can act on. So we have an implicit object model, which gives us an organizational construct for knowing where to look and where to go to find problems with our code or to add features. The pseudo inheritance with the scripting gives us the ability to modify behavior globally by changing the behavior of the common scripts, for example. So if we wanted to layer in a new metric capability, we can just modify the common scripts, add the metrics, and it's now everywhere. We have a consistent parameter structure. So once we've kind of wrapped our head around what we want to do with the parameter, it's going to be pretty much the same everywhere. And we don't have to stop and think about how we're going to create parameters to pass around. we use custom functions to control the scope of those parameters, with hopefully decently defined parameter names, so that once you've got that working, your interactions with the event are not directly through JSON set element with having to remember every sub element. It's rather, you just need to know how the event go to function works, or event go to find. And if you come up with some other idea, you can create another custom function. You sweat that over a couple of drinks and figure out how to debug that function. And once it's done, it encapsulates that complexity. And in the future, you don't need to worry about it. You know, for example, those data map functions that I showed, I don't remember exactly how I built them. I mean, I'm sure if I looked at the code, I'd remember exactly how the double while loop worked and so forth. But there were a lot of subtle issues, as I recall, when I was building that. But now once it's done, I don't have to think about it. I just use it. And so those common patterns provide some efficiency in our use. It gives us fine grained control, easy to locate control, easy to locate our code, a clean way to separate where we do what on the UI, and it supports the concept of loose coupling between file services and API services and so forth. We talked about how it's accessible for centralized logging. I really like the idea of having it be a driver for testing. I'm actually going to think about that. I think that's I do automatic testing for my API work, where I set up records that reflect every error state I can think of and drive it through the API handler. But I'm wondering how that could be extended to other parts of a system. And all you do is create the event. So if you create events with errors in them, you can make sure you handle them all properly. Again, I mentioned metrics can be layered on. And then the APIBroker is really just another event handler. It's just in its own file that's for security and utility, and also gives you the benefit of putting it on its own dedicated server if it becomes high volume. It's got a centralized repository of endpoints and credentials. I don't know if I really showed that to you. I'll take a look at that later if we want. Common logging. It supports multiple configurations. Such as an API client, where we're consuming API services provided by a third party. It could be an API server where we call it using data API or well, typically through data API. It could be set up as an ingestion processor in an ELT workflow, or it could be a feed to some external workflow. And all of it works with the existing FileMaker stuff. The regular FileMaker modules don't need to know how any of that works, because we've isolated complexity over on the broker side. So as an API consumer, we discussed that. I've done this once, where I set it up as a specialized API server for intermittently connected Go apps. So this handles the synchronization problem. So if you have a form that people need to fill out on a Go app, and they don't have reliable internet, you can basically have it be a standalone app and basically handle the login, payload send, and confirmation happen in almost like a single exchange, and then it logs off. And that actually works reasonably well. And that could be an API consumer and server for AWS mediated processes, as I mentioned briefly in the drawing. It could be a consumer of IoT actions. It could be treated as a generic webhook server. And it really helps isolate the rest of the solution from the complexities involved with integrating with the rest of the world. So I have a couple under the hood examples here. I'm going to show the address parsing via ship engine. I should have removed this, but I was in the middle of building a Wordle next best guess engine, which for those of you who follow my Wordle posts, I have not been using this. Okay, trust me, I've actually been guessing myself, but I did build a Wordle best guess engine in FileMaker, and I wanted to test that to see in a highly calculationally intensive environment how the APIBroker behaves. But it doesn't quite work yet, so I'm not really going to show it.
Russ,
But,
before we move on, we have a couple questions.
Sure.
I wanted to comment that I saw kind of behind the scenes, and there are more than 100 custom functions you've loaded into these files. Does it in any way affect performance to have that many functions called or created?
Well, I should caution you that those 100 custom functions are probably because I was lazy and just like imported everything from some other solution for this demo. The number of functions, well, to answer your question specifically, no, I have not seen any, the number of custom functions in a solution does not affect performance as far as I can tell. Writing a bad non-performant custom function, you know, will impact performance. But I've just found and we can go through them, but I mean, a lot of my custom functions are shortcuts like GSP for get script parameter.
Right.
Okay, so those are just like convenience functions, GFE, you know, or JFE, JSON format element, GTLN, get layout table name.
Okay, Bob Starkey wants to know what's today's Wordle answer.
I haven't done it yet. I've been too busy catering to satisfying your needs, Bob.
Tony White has a question. You want to?
Yes, I'll jump in. Thank you. Thank you, Lynn. So first off, I'm really enjoying the presentation because I think the thinking about how to architect a system, you know, how many files where and so forth and so on is really cool. So one of the what's my question? Are you using a faceless logic file, which would be tapping into the separation model for that file? I'm not saying, you know, for everything, so that you could make records in a different context. You know, maybe you want to make a record in the table that's in the same file as the other context, the calling context, and you want to, so, you know, in the old days, you might go to that layout, make a new record, but then you're kind of changing the context. Maybe you're exiting a portal and it's really complicated. So the faceless logic file to, you know, send the data using the technologies you're talking about here to make a record or run a query without changing the context in the UI. So are you tapping into that technique? Thank you.
Not directly. Instead, like this data map that I showed, you know, that's a piece of JSON that reflects the complete mapping of existing data and where it needs to go. So once you've assembled that in the current context, you need to be in a context in order to grab that data. So in theory, one could go to a faceless environment that's generic and acquire the context, or you could just do you know, if you're already in a context that has the data that you're trying to work with, you grab it all, and then you pass that parameter off to the target, and that target module would know where is it most optimal to create. But yes, that does create screen flicker, and it can create, you know, unless you control the windows, and you are going to a data layout in that target module. I've just, as much as it appears that I love abstraction, I really like debuggability and visual confirmation that, you know, what I think is happening is in fact what's happening. So
yeah, I think it's not something that we do in every file. It's something actually I'll confess I picked up relatively recently from one of the boards. I can tell you I've done it long enough that it does work well, and it is, I think, a complementary, you know, piece of code complementary to the things that you're doing.
great.
And it seems to work really well.
It more.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyway,
I appreciate
thank you.
that. So, so let me show really quickly, if you'd like, if we want, the API example, which again is really nothing. Whoops, where do I need to go? So, okay, so for example, in an APIBroker type file, there might be a log which, you know, would show like every transaction, you know, that happened. And this is a work in process, so it's pretty ugly, but you know, it's got the incoming event, it's got the response object that we're spitting back, but then we also are able to get the curl option that we passed in and extract the HTTP header response, and then actually get the full HTTP response and so forth. and we're able to separate out, for example, the credentials and the endpoint and maybe how many retry attempts and other kinds of data, whether it's whether we want to wait for the response or not, and whether it's a post or a get, things like this. So if I look at an example that leverages it, so this address validate or address parse, I think I'm doing address parse, which is taking a string and you get back to FileMaker and find my, here it is. And let's go to this layout. So, you know, here we could say, you know, we're trying to find Sherlock Holmes, and if we hit parse, it goes ahead and parses it. And if we were to look behind the scenes, what that did, oops. So we're, in this case, calling, let's take a look. Let's take a look at that button before we go any further. So we have a function, parse address, and we have a parameter, which is address with just the string that we happen to type into. And then we're going to create an event where we're initting with the parameters. And we'll just walk through this fairly quickly here. So we're using the ship engine module button handler for, that's just how I set it up in this little file. And it's the same basic model where we now have our address variable local. Okay, but we also have this whole event, so we can do stuff with it. And we'll go very quick through it. We're into the function handler. And in this case, we want to handle instead of going to common, we're actually going to handle it right here in the function handler. So we're going to call a script that does the parse address piece, which is the more heavy lift, right? And so here I have a couple of, I've separated out the creation of the curl option into a custom function because I screw those up so much. I don't really want to mess with them once I get them working. But we'll take a look at what that looks like. And then we create an event. So let's take a look at what our event looks like. Let's just pick out one of them. So we have our event. It's a ship engine address parse production. Well, I didn't really want to use the production module. It doesn't really matter. But here we have our curl data. This is the way ship engine wants to see its data. And then the header is, you know, a post with the response headers that we are going to need. And then I put in a placeholder here to substitute the key. So we don't need to distribute the key openly within the majority of the solution. The key is only saved in the token field in the API broker file. And then we performed the script on the server. I don't want to walk through all that right now, but you can see it was really quick. And it goes off and does the call and comes back. And if the result was, in this case, this particular handler just does a false instead of the full event error object. I'm going to be changing that. But for this demo, I just threw it together like that. And let's take a look at the response object. So we have our call, and then you can see we have our response here, and then we also have some HTTP headers in the details that came back. And I'm just returning instead of returning the full event, in this case, I'm just returning the address object itself, because at this level, we don't need to debug the event object. If that needs to be logged, that would be handled by the API broker. So in this case, our response in this context is something that is actually very simple to work with. And from here on, it's stuff that we're all very, comfortable with. We just do some set fields, and we back our way out of the hierarchy. So if I had wanted to record errors directly within this address verified, then I'd modify the call, the response back from the API broker to return the full event and its error so that the local file would be able to have it. Just to give you an idea, so here's like an address string that might come in through a chat bot or something, right? So if we parse that address, it comes back where it thinks the beach is a line. So this is not the validate address piece. It would work the same way. We would then take this data, pass it to validate address, it would come back with a valid address or a flag that it was invalid, and we can deal with it.
I have a question, Russ.
Yes.
The specific data for your APR targets, like the key and the headers required and everything, you keep that in a table somewhere. Is it in the API broker file or somewhere else?
It's right here. So here's the endpoint for, actually, I think we were in address parse, but yeah, address parse dev here. Right, so this would be where you put the endpoint. The way I've structured it, I've separated the endpoint and the token here at the API level. So when the script gets called, when it gets invoked, that perform script on server, it's actually going to the API file, finding the record, getting the endpoint, getting the token, getting the number of retries, whether it's a post or not, or so forth. Then it's going to the API log file. And here we should be able to see what happened with our, so here's our beach example that we just did, right? And so, and it handles creating the curl off of some of the parameters that we passed, and then it extracts the HTTP headers, the HTTP response. One complexity I'm still trying to sort out, if we take a look at, for example, the custom functions, so this is a feature I really wish FileMaker would address. So this recognize, ship engine recognize, right? So here, this is what's creating the header and the data. So I'm passing in the raw address. I've built in the specific eccentricity of what ship engine wants as its header here. And, I had to do some substitution to make sure there were no carriage returns, for example, in the address string that was passed. And then we create an element, a JSON object that has a header and a curl option header and a curl option data, which is what my code over in the API broker is expecting when it's processing the data. So this is something that is under my control, but it's a way of abstracting it. The challenge here is I'd really love if these custom functions could only reside in the API broker and that remote files could access them. But in order to, there's no easy way to do that. So I might need to think of another way of abstracting the like maybe embed the curl option more into the API table instead of it having been built into the call. Again, this is a work in process, so there's some refinements I need. At the moment, I would have to, you build the functions into the source file so you could construct the event locally. To make it easier, it would would be to give things a little more straightforward at the front end, if you will. But I haven't yet done that level of abstraction.
Okay, cool. You have about another 5-6 minutes.
Well, let me get back to that. So what are the implications of this? So I think this sort of event model thinking is suitable for new solutions with long-term supportability. It's functional, it's resilient and maintainable. You can bolt it onto existing solutions, or the API broker can be bolted onto existing solutions. You don't have to have already supported an event model everywhere. You can still do the kind of API stuff I've been talking about without having to do that. It does simplify the It does simplify the integration patterns, which make Claris-based solutions really powerful peers, even in very complex IT environments. While we're eagerly, looking for simpler ways of doing some of these things, as Connect matures, we'll be able to use it more and more. But if it ever cul-de-sacs with your desired service, you could always, build your own connector that handles it. And by that, I mean, sometimes third-party APIs have a very rich and deep API, but Claris Connect might only implement it in a particular way. And if you need to take advantage of some of the deeper features, it might not be trivial to implement that directly within the Connect environment. And now I'm getting off into tea leaf reading and sort of maybe magical thinking. I'm not sure. But as we learn more about what Claris Pro and Claris Studio integration might be, if we think of Claris Studio as a potentially generic object store of name value pairs or complex JSON objects, what mechanisms are they going to provide to surface that data directly within Pro, and is it going to be enough? We really can do pretty much everything we need to do now. It just takes more effort and more work. And so hopefully Studio should make it easier to handle certain use cases, certainly in the near term. Over time, it would be great. And I don't even know if I'm using the right terminology here, but to the extent that Studio has some sort of flow events or flow process control, it would be great if there would be a way that Claris Pro event type objects like I've described today, or API broker constructs like I've described, could be leveraged for tighter integration and presumably support some degree of bidirectional flow, separate from the need to directly create records, or maybe in addition from the need to directly create records from a single tightly constrained pathway. So if it's easy for problem solvers to create solutions that can easily subscribe to those events, and by the same token create events over there, it would be terrific. So in theory, if we have a consumer of a MongoDB object store, if we're able to get to it directly, then we should be able to do that. So anyway, that would just be something that would be very cool. So onward, I think we actually have huge opportunities with the tool set that we have available today, and even more so with what's coming. I don't believe, for most of us who have stuck with the platform this long, that the additional learning curve is really that steep. If you don't know the JSON tools, that's perhaps one of the harder ones. Although if you find a pattern like the ones I've described, once you built that or get that in your solution, the rest of it's relatively straightforward. It gives us solutions everywhere. We can be on-prem, in the cloud, mobile, connected, synced. We can interoperate from APIs to clouds to Internet of Things. And apparently we're on a really good pathway for a nice combination of relational and object store combined solutions with tight integration. So again, I really, really appreciate you giving me this opportunity to share what I've been thinking about, and I'm happy to address any other questions.
Yeah, anybody got some questions? This is Russ's pandemic work, so I really admire your ambition.
I just want to say, I think it's a really good exercise, Russ. You've given a lot of thought to it. It seems like it's still got some gaseous edges to it that allow you to kind of continue to kind of polish it out as you come across other things. I like it more from a standpoint of an intermediate tool that both can work in FileMaker, and if you move between FileMaker and other web tools and so forth, you could actually kind of build connectors on either side of this and have it be a relatively universal sort of go-between that that talks nicely with FileMaker, but also can adapt to other languages.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the thought here is to have I don't want to have to think different anymore. That was 1980s. I want to have a consistent way of looking at solution integration, and I want to hide complexity as much as I can in various silos, so that if I need to, open the hood and service the motor, I'll do that. And then when I'm done, I want to close the hood and not think about it. And I want to then let other people drive the car. So, it's having this multiple. I mean, it's kind of amazing that we came from this, and now we're talking about this. Is really quite a testimony to the engineering that's been done, both in the wedge and in the post-wedge era over at the Claris organization. And I don't really think we can point the finger at them anymore for holding us back from the kinds of solutions that we want to build. The limitations are now entirely ours.
Russ, I also wanted to say I really enjoy the whole modularity of what you've done. And it makes the coding so much simpler when you keep everything modular. If you want to change something, you change it in one place. Reminds me, does anyone remember at DEF CON a while ago, and there was this one presenter who had used this acronym DRY, do not repeat yourself. And I loved it. It's the idea of you put the code in one place and then you don't have to redo it every time. And it's portable and it's flexible. And it's powerful. I love it.
Well, thank you. I mean, this is again, this sort of fell out naturally, like when thinking about the picture I drew at the beginning of the talk, right? When we have these different pieces and we want to think about, well, how are we going to address this? I mean, most of us came to FileMaker from a layout-oriented perspective. So we would graphically create a form because we came back from the days of paper. So we replicate that paper form. Okay, and then later on, we started thinking about, well, how are we going to manipulate those forms? And now it's like, well, what data do we need to manipulate? What is the core object that we're working with? And what I'm proposing here is the utility of this intermediate object called what I'm referring to as an event object to pass stuff around, which isolates the eccentricity and specifics of any layout or any third-party system or anything else, because we're always manipulating data in this data layer, if you will, that exchanges in a common way. And that frees us because we're no longer worrying about what we change on the layout and worrying if that's going to break our data integration patterns. We can change the layout whatever we want because we know that as long as we're creating the event object with the right data in it, the data stuff will work. Which gets back to the question about testing earlier, which is now we do have this ability to separate our minds from, all right, is our data flow working? Is the processing working? Is the quality of the data there? From, does this look right? Are we surfacing correct information to the customer and to the user and so forth? So if we have data objects that are specifically for manipulating UI, those things would be updated at the button handler level, for example, not at the function handler level, because we'd be working within the layout for the things that are driving it.
Yep.
So.
Well, thank you, Russ and everyone. I'm going to pause or resume recording. Are there any announcements, quick announcements before we begin? If not, Andy Lacates from Claris is here with us, and he's going to talk about Problem Solver Circle and Claris Studio. So take it away, Andy. Oh, unmute yourself, dear.
If I could find my mouse, I'd be better. There we go.
There we go.
Sorry about that, Lynn. I
No
thought I
problem.
was muted. But no, thank you. And thank you all for having me. I think this came together relatively last minute. I think I was saying, as I was saying earlier, Rosemary has really been leading the charge to have us present and out in front of as many groups and developers as we can lately, particularly because we've had just so much to talk about. I don't know how many of you watched Richard Carlton's live stream after Pete and Brad and I did the presentation 2 weeks ago, but it was rather humorous in my opinion, but he seemed to be overwhelmed with the kind of amount of content that came out in that one meeting. So we know that there's a lot of questions out there, and been talking to a lot of developers and partners about them. And so I just wanted to offer to be here to kind of AMA this topic a little bit and make sure that you guys have a sense of what Problem Solver Circle is and wants to be. And if you have any questions about it, I can try and clarify. And if the same goes for Claire Studio, if you have questions about it, I can do my level best. I'm not Robert Hulsey or Pete, but I have some sense of what's coming. And so I didn't come here with a specific agenda or a slide deck, but just wanted to be available and have a conversation. So is that useful? Can we treat it that way, Lynn?
Absolutely. For those of us who did not see that, can you just do like a couple sentences on Problem Solver Circle?
I can. Yeah, so Pete and Brad and I got together 2 weeks ago and did a webinar. It is up on YouTube if you haven't seen it. And the basic crux of it was a reaffirmation by Brad and all of us that developers and partners drive our business, right? It was an explicit acknowledgement of that. We don't grow our business, you do. And to wit, Peter spent some time talking about product directions and fundamentally that we have some rather significant plans for FileMaker. Vince was just talking about some of them that we think are pretty important in advancing the platform, but as well that he's got some sort of specific vision and North Stars that our team is chasing to build out the product so that we can complement this powerful, I think he called it our superpower, right? Our powerful tool set that we know and love and have lived by for decades in FileMaker with cloud scale technologies that will complement it and help us extend our ability to create value into new domains and new ways, right? And potentially address new users. And so we had a lot to talk about there, including some rebranding and a new product, if you will. It's not really a new product. The whole product is the Claris platform, but we have something called Claris Studio now that helps synthesize these new cloud technologies with the rest of the platform with some rebranding implications there. And there's reasons for that, but we're not taking away FileMaker Pro. FileMaker Pro stays, but we will have a Claris Pro version of it, a Claris Server, a Claris Go, along with Claris Studio. And there's some reasons for that. But this will get us to a place where then we can, again, build a unified tool set. I think Pete in the past has called it like a one Claris platform. So we have all the things that Claris provides as developers to go off and conquer the world. We didn't make any announcements about new pricing or packaging. It was all sort of intention focused in terms of that product strategy. And then for my part, the baton was handed to talk about a program that we started on 10 days ago that is called Problem Solver Circle. And the Problem Solver Circle, thank you for the link, Rosemary, in the chat, is specifically a program for customers to engage in. And what it does is allows you to take your existing footprint with our platform, with FileMaker, and you can essentially turn it into a site license. And not just a site license for FileMaker, but for everything Claris offers. So it also includes Claris Connect, and also includes a developer preview of Claris Studio, the new stuff. And so the idea is for a customer that has realized value with our platform, leveraging a developer, leveraging a partner, and are getting some success, but may not have used it across their organization to repeatedly get that same sort of value bump for their organization, to continuously improve and get innovation, right? If they haven't yet done that, then this program could be fantastic, right? Because it would essentially give everyone all of our tools, and for 2 years, all of those tools for all of their employees. And in fact, it's licensed so that external, folks, if you want to do public facing forms to customers or, vendors or what have you, you can do those as well. And so we think the program is pretty exciting. and we're getting a lot of interest in it for what it's worth. We've got hundreds of customers that are interested in talking to us about it. We are going to cap the program at 500 customers, or we're going to stop letting people in at the end of the quarter, which I think is June 20 something, 24th. I don't know, whatever that last Friday in June is. Because it is sort of a radical bet for us in our business. And if we're not careful, we do this with every customer that we possibly have in the world. It's not clear what that will do at our revenue, but we think it's going to be revenue positive for us a little bit, and then really set the stage for developers and partners to go and just do more with this platform, incent customers to want to use developers and partners. That's the core of it. So that's my long-winded, sorry, it wasn't a TLDR. That was my long-winded summary of that presentation. But I hope that's helpful. And I don't know, are any of you interested in the problem solver circle? Any questions about it that I can help clarify or expand upon? I'd love to hear from you.
I just wanted to say, Andy, that short little blurb, that was the clearest explanation that I've heard of what the problem solver circle was. That 2-minute blurb you did was more helpful than any of the webinars I attended.
Awesome.
It was very succinct, and I like that. It was really clear. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I hope that doesn't mean I did a shitty webinar 2 weeks ago.
No, I mean, listen, I think that the webinar was trying to, serve a lot of masters and cover a lot of bases.
Yeah.
But I just like the succinct explanation as to what it was, because I didn't understand after the webinars, and now I do.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, one thing that, because we had talked about the product roadmap and including the Claris Studio technologies, and then followed it with the problem solver circle, which includes a developer preview for that. I know that many of our developers and customers have concluded that what we were saying is you need to get in problem solver circle to see Claris Studio, right? Like that's the ticket to get in to see it right now. And at some level that's true, but that's not what problem solver circle is about. The advantage of early access to Studio, that early access advantage will go away in a few months. Like down the road, that won't be an advantage of problem solver circle anymore at all. But what will persist is what we really want to build is a greenfield for developers and partners to do more for 2 years, that customers have access to all our stuff for anything they want to do. And then at the end of the 2 years, if the customers realize value in different places in their organization, we'll true up. We'll come back and say, okay, now that you're not using 25 seats, but using 75 seats, let's figure out your best licensing option and get the customer back in a true up space. So we think, it's a risk for us at some level to kind of give it all away for 2 years, but not really. We think if customers are doing more and building value and employing developers and employing partners to do it, that's going to rise all ships for us. So we're very optimistic that it's going to be awesome. So.
I have 2 questions, Andy. One is, I think in one of the webinars, you or one of your colleagues mentioned sort of a most appropriate customer base. Something I can't remember the numbers. 50 to 500 users, or I can't remember. So I'm wondering if you remember what that was. So, for instance, many of us have a bunch of very small, business clients with 5 or 10 users, something like that. Would they be appropriate for this program? And then my second question is, would customers who enter this program lose their perpetual license advantage if they have a perpetual license? Does it transfer to, depending on what they want to do in 2 years, what happens to that perpetual?
Yeah, but presumably, I'll take the second question first. Presumably, if they get to the end of 2 years and they realize no more value, or the volume licensing program doesn't make sense anymore, unless we get rid of perpetual licensing altogether, it's still there. And I think they could choose to say, yep, okay, we did it. We had our fun. Now we have 75 seats and let's buy perpetual for that. Or now we have 12 seats, let's buy, it should be there. I don't expect a change that would remove it, right? And so we'll relicense them for whatever is the most appropriate thing. To the first question, so you're asking, we were talking about maybe ideal customers for the program. First, I'll say we want to be inclusive more than exclusive. Although we're limiting the number, we really are not doing any kind of exclusion because you're too small or you're too big or whatever. We would love customers of all sorts to get into it. There's some advantage for us in this as an agile experiment, right? Not on the product, but on how we go to market. And so we have a chance to learn with the customers that get in the program, what they care about, what works, what doesn't work, for partners, for internal developers, right? There's a lot of learnings that we can get. And so we want to be inclusive, and there is still room, by the way. So one of the ways you can look at an ideal customer for this is to think about the licensing for it. And I didn't describe it in my summary there, but the idea is based on your existing footprint. So if I have 25 seats, we would take an annual rate for that footprint, whatever that licensing is, whatever you pay currently in your license, and essentially add 30% to it and then charge you for 2 years, right? We'll bump your rate. So we will make a little bit of money to sort of cover our risk, but it's not a lot. It's just that. But then if you do the math, you're like, okay, I got 25 seats, but my company has 28 employees. Does it make sense for me to pay for 32 seats for 28 employees? Maybe not. You might say no. But if you got 25 seats and you have 100 employees or 1,000 employees, then whoa, now it starts to look really attractive, right? Because I can license 1,000 employees for essentially the price of 8 more, or 32 seats or 33 seats, whatever it is. And so you can do the math like that, and then it seems like, well, small footprint, big company, I'm all in, right? But reality, I think the ideal customer, if I'm a partner or an internal developer, is where I have a customer that's using the platform a little bit, could be doing a lot more, and has some interest in doing more, but licensing has kind of been getting in the way. The boss is like, yeah, I'm not paying to do a new project. Like, hey, boss, we can pay a little bit more, and now you can just cut me loose. For 2 years, I can go just let's innovate everywhere. I think that's the ideal. So size really isn't the thing, and I think if you got a smaller customer that has an interest, call our sales team up. They'll figure it out with you for sure. Yep.
So this does come with the warning that if they do start using it enterprise-wide, that they would, in a couple of years, they would have to go back to the normal cost for the platform.
Correct. I would phrase that less as a warning and more as a preparation, right? Hopefully, as you're using the platform more, you're producing value, it has value. And so I think as partners and developers, I think we need to be honest with the boss and say, okay, we're paying a little bit more, but if I'm going to save you $30,000 a quarter on this new project for maybe 10 more seats, rationally today, that would cost us X amount a year or whatever, right? Like you can do that TCO or total economic impact or whatever for the customer and say, as long as we're doing things that matter and create business value, we're probably going to come out ahead. And I think, it's going to be incumbent on us to make sure that whoever's paying the bills knows that, right? Because in 2 years ago, we'll true up.
So at the beginning of the 2 years, we want to be able to tell them this is what it's going to look like at the end of the 2 years. If we go ahead and go down this road, right?
For sure. And there's probably uncertainty over 2 years too. Like we're trying to advocate for continuous improvement and an agile approach. Like, hey boss, what's our next biggest, priority, right? Oh, well, we've already solved something over here in manufacturing, but we want to cover something in customer support. I don't know what, we're going to do trouble tickets. Let's go do that. If we do it, we'll be able to process this many more customers and, I don't know, save money on repairs. I don't know what, but you figure out like, what is the advantage we're trying to do for that company, fix it. And then if you do that, hopefully those things have value. And if you're just solving stuff that's kind of experimental or fluffy, then okay, maybe that's not worth paying for in 2 years. We've had some industries, where, I don't know, the movie industry, where 2 years is a long time and you may not need those licenses in 2 years. It's conceivable you could pull a fast one on us, right? And get access to a bunch of licenses, do something for 2 years that makes sense to you that you won't care about in the third year. And that's fine. Go off and have a ball, right? We're willing to take that risk. So.
Is this for now? I had tried to get one of my clients signed up, and they told me that because he was already on a site license, he couldn't do it.
Great question. So originally, we excluded existing site license customers for doing it. They're already blanket covered. In theory, they have that greenfield, the ability to use anywhere. Although there might be some utility in adding Connect and the access to Claire Studio in there. But we're changing the rules on that one. Again, and we want to be inclusive. So there
because
can be
the studio part and the Connect could really benefit them to see how it would work. And that's why I first put it in. And they said, oh, he's already got a site license. We don't allow it. And from what you say, like now he is eligible for it.
Yeah, so you're not alone in asking about this. We've only been at it 10 days, but a number of customers have come back to us interested despite already having site licenses. The math may or may not work out for them, but our sales reps will help walk you through that. If you've got a multi-year site license for us, and this is a 2-year program, we may not be able to credit you back enough to make anything work, right? But call the sales guys. They'll be happy to work with you and figure out if it's something we can do. We are allowing site license customers in where it makes sense for them. So that's a recent change.
Yeah, I think it would benefit. I mean, I have another smaller client that could benefit from some of the Claris Connect stuff,
Awesome.
but he doesn't need a site license. He's only got one license, only one user.
Yep.
Not sure if that would, be worthwhile for him, but this other guy certainly does. And that's why I pushed him first. And
Awesome.
so I'll have to readdress that with him and the sales guy.
Yeah, give them a call. And, it can sometimes take a bit to kind of work through it, but our sales reps are highly incentivized to get people in and make it make sense. It is a little complex because we're doing this variable licensing idea, right? It's like whatever your existing footprint is, add 30%, charge you for 2 years and get you in. And customers come at us with every possible footprint, and they're different. I had one partner that we were working with that brought us a customer that has 70,000 employees. And I forget what their seat footprint was. It was relatively low, say 50 seats or something. But the challenge was we couldn't graduate them from 50 to 70,000 because they actually had multiple deployments across that organization. There were seats all over the place. And our goal is not to reduce our licensing with the customer. Like if they had 300 seats across that company, we're not going to take one 50-seat license, turn it into 70,000 and give back the 250 and lose our shirts. Like we can't do that effectively. So we could have maybe consolidated all the licensing in that big organization, but reality was to work with their purchasing department, that would have taken us 6 months. So what we did in that case is we're looking at where those seats were used that they want to expand. We found a way to site license a sub-organization of Megacorp and license them and make it work. So, we'll be flexible and do what we can to make the system work. When we get to 500, we'll cry uncle and look and see what's next. But I would encourage you all, if there's some potential value in the program, again, at the end of the day, we want it to make business sense for the business owner who's trying to innovate, make money with their company, save cost on their company, grow and compete, but that they want to do that. And then they leverage partners and developers to get it done. That's the heart of it. Like we just want to make more work, more business, more opportunity for you guys. So that's the experiment. And I hope it works. I know you're in with us, so let's go make it happen.
Well, I want to point out too that people can reach out to you or to Rosemary about all this, and you'll be open to talking to anyone who has concern.
Lynn, I know we're probably killing on time, but I just want to add one thing because there's the question about site licenses. Another excluded customer from the program was at launch customers who have expired licensing. The reason there was pretty straightforward. We just didn't want somebody who didn't have a license agreement with us to come back and buy 5 seats and then expand it to 1,000, even though they used to be licensed for 250, right, or something. And so we were requiring that you were currently licensed with us. We're changing that now. Our sales reps can look at our records and figure out what the licensing footprint has most recently been, and I think we'll figure it out there too. So if you have somebody who has an expired licensing with us that might, be interested in this and it might be a good way to get them back on the platform, call us up. We'll do what we can to make that work too.
Sounds like you guys are being very flexible. That's cool.
I think so. There's a lot of energy. I would love to see 500 customers get in here. We have a very short window in 2 months. And that's part of the reason why we're out here beating the drum a lot, just to make sure that, there's some urgency in seeing if we can get those numbers up. But we're really excited about the program. And I'm most excited as a developer, a former developer myself, what happens after this quarter when we have 2 years in front of us to work with this cohort of customers to really just look at different ways that we can innovate, expand, learn from each other. I think there's an enormous opportunity ahead of us. So I'm excited for that too.
Alan?
All right. So I understand that you're excluding SBA from this program. I just want to explore that a little bit with you. We have a client that is about to renew their licenses. They do 3 years at a time, and they do concurrent licenses, but they're a very large company worldwide. So in terms of the thinking, could you just explain why you've decided to exclude SBA?
I think with SBA, it's because it gets complex. You know, the SBA partner is selling their product, not necessarily our platform, to a customer. And so in that case, sort of the explicit, I don't know, going out to that customer then and selling that customer on expanding their use of FileMaker that they may have no awareness of that they even have. They have an app, not a platform. And we just didn't want to be stomping on our SBAs who own that customer relationship. And then it's not clear what happens after 2 years if they take that SBA footprint and then expand all over their organization. We come back in 2 years and it's like, well, what revenue does the SBA still own in that relationship versus us, or I don't know what, right? So it got complex, I think, Alan, is what's happening there. It wasn't for lack of love or interest in SBA success, to be sure. And we've had discussions with a couple other SBAs on the topic. And so we're not done at the end of June either, right? There'll be new opportunities to do new programs and try things out, and we'll be open to doing more. So unless we get an interesting rationale to pivot on the SBA thing real fast, I don't know that that'll be part of this program, but we'll figure something out going forward. So if you want to talk about that more, I'd love to get together with you one-to-one.
The other question is, are you taking off all the restrictions on Claris Connect in this program in terms of...
We're not removing restrictions. We're providing the highest level of Claris Connect, which I think is standard licensing. So if you look at the Claris Connect pricing, we wanted to kind of go to just the highest version of it and didn't want people to have to worry about nickel and diming their way to more whatever. Just give it all to them. And then if they do exceed the transaction count on there, I don't know if we'll sell packs or whatever we need to do. But we didn't want to like start low and trick people. It's not a bait and switch. That's not what we're trying to do. So.
All right, thanks, Andy.
Yep, and same goes for FileMaker Cloud. The pricing is a little different. If you want to use FileMaker Cloud with the program, you can. The pricing is more expensive. We double it instead of adding a third. But in that case, you get cloud for every employee you have up to 100, which is cloud's limit. And then we provide the standard, I guess, version of cloud at 100 users if you have more than 100 employees. So.
Skype audio. Thank you very much, Andy, for being here with us and answering all these questions. And obviously, people can get in touch with you if they need to. We're going to move on now to Dave Knight, our fearless leader. He's going to be talking about FileMaker FMDiSC next version. So please give him your attention and your inventive feedback.
Yeah, this is really just meant to be a conversation, a little bit about where we started, where we've been and where we're going. And we're going to just take a little look back, and then I really want to kind of harvest any good information that our membership and attendees here can provide. So, just to kind of, look into the way back machine, version 1 of FMDiSC was 1999. So that was, another century. We originally met in Studio City, tiny little DWorks offices up there across from Chin Chin, about 300 square feet. We were thrilled to be working on FileMaker Pro 5, which you could manage your data from desktop to web, it says here. So that was always the thrill. But that's basically the era that we were in right then. And we started the group, 22, 23 years ago, 5 members. So that was sort of, the pin drop for how we got our genesis. Followed a number of years later, we outgrew the space. We were lucky enough to get in with the Apple Market Center. And so out to Santa Monica, we had the beautiful facilities there. We got a lot of significant growth. Those were the days of FileMaker 7, probably one of the most significant releases of all time and one of the real expansions to the marketplace for the product line. So a number of years later, next thing you know, the version 3 of FMDiSC, I sort of consider the Brissy years. And those were good long years at the Brissy Center, mid-city, middle. You finish the meeting, you get some great Korean barbecue if you wanted to afterwards or whatever. And we covered a lot of turf, a lot of versions of FileMaker, but one of the more significant ones, FileMaker 13. And, we got into new themes and styles and WebDirect and all the things that kind of came along the way at that point. So where are we at, at this point in the timeline? BCAC, what does that stand for? Well, I kind of just going before COVID and after COVID, right? The world changed after COVID hit. There's so many just changes to our day-to-day life. Perfect example, before COVID, your evening plans often looked like this. And then after COVID, it was really just about this. So we as a group, we had some pretty significant changes as well. So in the early days, version 1, 2, and 3 of FMDiSC, we're kind of on that side of the divide, and where we're at right now and where we're going are on the after COVID side. So just to kind of point out kind of where we're standing at the moment, in version 4, at least how I see it, I feel like the group, we always talk in our craft about digital transformations. I feel like the group went through a digital transformation with version 4. No more sitting in downtown LA traffic to get to the meetings, right? No more. We have this thing called Zoom now, and that's why Mr. Andy Lacaze didn't have to hop on a jet to be here today. Yeah, so he's thanking us for that. One of the other things that this allowed us to do, we started right there in glorious Southern California. But when you look at who's attending our meetings over the last bunch of years, man, especially in the last, couple of years with COVID and so forth, we're all over the place. We've got people in Europe and New Zealand and the West Coast and East Coast and so on and so forth, all over the place coming in here. So we're not just this, tight little cohesive group. We're 300 plus members. We're the largest developer group in the world. In the FileMaker camp. So this is, when you look out the rear view mirror of the car we've been driving down the road, there's a lot of road behind us and a lot of changes over time. So, I think it's sort of our question right now. We're looking at where we're standing right now is Claris FileMaker Pro 19 is the, kind of current shipping tool set that we have at our disposal. But, let's now talk about where the future is, right? So version 5 of FMDiSC, first and foremost, one of the things that strikes me is, we all of a sudden are potentially losing at some point that name to the very, name of the group. We look at the name of the group, even, FileMaker developers in Southern California, and really about the only thing we can kind of retain there is we're all still developers, right? But the FileMaker equation and the in Southern California, of course, many of us are still here and love our roots in Southern California, but it just begs the question of, who we are and what we represent and so forth. So it may be just a good time. We've wanted to talk about a lot of things with respect to, what do we need to do as we kind of reinvent this group or just kind of reforge what the future looks like for this group. And of course, some of the product offerings and changes coming out of the mothership at Claris have some impact on this, but also, again, the world of COVID and just is it time to kind of stir the pot a little bit? So our board, we've been kind of kicking around a lot of ideas, and we really do want to bring it to the group here and kind of field some questions and get some feedback and some interest here. So I want to talk a little bit, sort of about the meeting content. We're going to just go kind of round robin. Anybody has an idea? I may let Lynn or Jonathan kind of help field the questions so that I can be kind of moderator and they can kind of tell me who's lining up with questions and so forth. But the questions of what's next, first and foremost, we're a topic-based organization. So I want to talk about the style. We'll talk a little bit more about the style and how the topics get delivered, but what are we going to talk about? So, obviously continue to talk about, we saw some great stuff today where Russ showed off some really cool and abstracted ways of working with data inside, our traditional GoPro and server environments. I foresee in the future that we're going to want to be talking about Studio. How do we snap on this functionality? How does it extend what we currently have? How does it enable us to solve new types of problems? I don't think we work in a vacuum. I think we do best as a group when we look into, other platforms around us. There are things other platforms can do that are a better fit for some of our issues. Other technology, I don't think we have, a meeting. We don't go 3 meetings where we're not talking about JavaScript in some fashion or another. And do we continue to kick the tires of here's what great design entails, and let's take a look at business topics, new tax codes, AB5, et cetera, et cetera. So before we go any deeper on this, I want to just kind of feel, I'm paying attention to my screen right now, so I can't see any hand raises, but if any of the board members or if somebody wants to unmute and just kind of raise their hand and throw out some ideas, I'd love to hear them.
Dave, thanks for that summary and look back. I think the issue it triggered for me, and I think this is true in everything we're dealing with in the post-COVID era or the potentially post-COVID era, is like, are things going to go back to the way they were, or are we just going forward based on everything that's happened over the last couple of years? And, you know, I think certainly at the beginning when it's like, oh, we've got this pandemic, we can't meet in person, let's just hop on Zoom. But as soon as this thing passes, we'll go back to meeting at Brzee and everybody getting together in person the third Friday of the month, et cetera. I think that was certainly the expectation. And I think as time has gone on, and we've obviously seen some of the benefits that you alluded to, I think there's less of a, you know, let's just go back to how things were before. Let's just hit undo, you know, and go back to how they were before. On the other hand, we've also lost some things in this change, inevitably. So, you know, that's where we've sort of kicked around just informally the idea of maybe some sort of a hybrid model where occasionally we get together in person, but most of the time we'd be meeting on Zoom for all the reasons. But you know, certainly the group has changed, just like so many things have changed. And you know, I think we have to embrace that change and figure out, you know, how to move forward.
Well said. Other topic ideas. I mean, have we as a group been pointing our compass in the right direction over the last, let's just say the last year or two? You know, obviously we're not doing a show of hands in Brzee going, who wants to talk about plugins next month? You know, we're literally, you know, fielding and grabbing people. The great thing about this new format, it is so easy for us to go, Rob Russell in New Zealand, can you present? You know, Chris Moyer, can we have you do your excellent little post pause on error presentation that we heard so much good about? We've got such great tentacles now into pools of developers from all over, you know, Bev Voth in Kentucky, who helped us out a couple of meetings ago, et cetera, et cetera. So my question is, are we in general, does anybody have any feedback for the board in terms of where we're pointing our compass? Are we are we showing the kind of content, you know, the topics and the subject matter? Is it ringing a bell with you? Do we need to make adjustments? Are there enhancements to the things that we're talking about?
Dave, I want to kind of ask a question to answer at the same time. A lot of the groups are needing that balance of newbie and more advanced, whereas I think your group is almost exclusively more advanced. So I don't think there's a need for you to go with the more, you know, here's this function this time, and next time we'll talk about that function.
I think our group, you know, one of the things that's interesting, we've toyed with the idea, you know, we've been around for a long time and we've toyed with the idea over multiple periods about, do we lower the bar? We have always strived to, you know, a rising tide, you know, floats all boats kind of thing. We have always strived to be, you know, you'll see in some of our marketing literature, et cetera, you know, intermediate and advanced. But I think we always like parking the flag as high up on the shore as we can, because, and especially even now that we are videotaping, you know, now that we're recording all of our meeting content, it's a great resource for that intermediate level developer to go, hey, I remember there was something I didn't understand yet, but I can go back to YouTube and cruise through this demonstration that Russ Kohn did back in 2022 and kind of re-educate myself or fill in some gaps. So that's, to your point, Bev, we've never tried to sit there and kind of aim for the low end of the space. I think there's a lot of private FileMaker training courses, a lot of resources, FileMaker Academy. There's been a lot of, Claris, I think, has done a really good job of kind of raising the bar of resources for that new problem solver, workforce, you know, workplace magician, if you will. But I think we've always liked kind of being at the high end of that, and just to really kind of keep our motors tuned. And we feel that that pulls a lot of other people into our wake.
Yeah, that was the question that we had when we were trying to start the Dig FM, was what is that balance, or do we need to? And I think we all sort of felt like if you don't understand it today, that's okay. Tomorrow your brain will go, oh, I saw that, or I was there at that meeting, or, you know, so-and-so said this, and it's just going to be a light bulb moment. So we always try to encourage the newbies or the intermediates that don't get something to go ahead and attend, and they will discover that they will have learned what you said. They just didn't need it now.
Right. The other thing about this, gosh, I remember, back in the day, it was pretty easy to get to know almost everything about the platform. Back in the I remember my early days of 3.0, I was like, and I'm done. I've got all this stuff down. And then as new technologies, new capabilities, and so forth, it's almost impossible to master every area of the platform anymore. But this is such a great community in that, wow, Bob Shockey showed off something at a meeting 4 months ago, and I don't quite understand what that is. That's where you go online. You go to our groups.io and you go, hey, Bob showed off this really cool technique about themes and styles, and I didn't quite get my arms around it. You know, I don't see too many people in our community where if somebody raises their hand, others don't try to help them and solve that problem. So that's another thing, is not only do we have sort of high-end content for you, but we have people in the community that are happy to help give you a boost and get you to those points in your development experience. So I think those two things go in.
I have something to say to that. We have always positioned ourselves as a developers group rather than a users group. So but we don't discourage users or clients from showing up. We just don't modify our content for them. Yeah, we do want to lift everybody up, but was it you, Dave, who put into the board that we've had a gradually decreasing slope on our the number of posts on our groups IO platform, that our discussions among ourselves are not as lively or as engaged as they have been. And to me, that means that we're beginning to lose touch with one another because we're not seeing each other in person, and we're not getting that welcoming kind of one-on-one, yes, you can contact me if you have a problem, or that kind of stuff. And I'd like to find a way to encourage that more.
Yeah, I'm gonna talk. I'm going to flip to another slide in a minute or two that talks about, what does on-prem, do we do this again, and how does that look like, and what's the recipe? My focus, and everything that everybody's been saying, really well received. My focus right now, what should we be talking about in our meetings? So if, whether we're on-prem or doing things remote via Zoom or whatever, are these the areas that we should be steering towards? Does anybody have any corrections there? So I'm seeing some hand raises with Stephen Blackwell and Tony White. Stephen?
Thank you. I will put in no surprise,
security.
Yes, for security, but specifically for new methods of authentication, passwordless authentication, getting the business of authentication and account management out of files and into federation systems where they belong. And there'll be more and more of that coming along. And in fact, just this week, Microsoft, Apple, and Google jointly announced that they would be moving in that direction, generally speaking, on their platforms.
Great, Mr. Tony White. So again, I'm just gonna, it's an open challenge to anytime we as a community need to be sharpening our axe in the security realm. I look wholeheartedly in the direction of Alexandria, Virginia, with a couple of doses of whim to court added whenever possible. So yeah, that Stephen, always welcome to help us reshape that narrative when the time comes, or when things significantly are modified, that we need to be kind of refocusing on those things. Tony, what do you got for us?
So first off, I like the level of complexity of your content, you know, that you're intermediate to advanced, or whatever you want to call it. I think that's good. I think beginners can catch up. Another thought, just kind of riffing around here, is looking at what other user groups are doing. I've gone to a lot of user groups in the past couple of years. That's what I've been doing.
Yeah.
And by looking at other user groups, I can see what topics they've covered. And if a user group covers a topic and they record it, I would not present it myself. You know, I wouldn't duplicate pre-existing content. Although I do see a use case for, you know, people going to a big user group, because you get the local audience. Even though it's recorded and remote, people do tend to keep the community together. The other thing that I'll say on topics is that I think that we all benefit from covering the latest, greatest, and, you know, data API, for instance, whatever. We all should know that. I know that. You know, I do that kind of stuff. I do say, and I've said this probably repeatedly, you might have heard me say it, bread and butter topics. I'll say this out loud, I'm being recorded. I was looking at custom menus, which I've implemented years ago. I took a fresh look at it, and I came up just yesterday, with ways of doing custom menus that were superior to the way that I was doing it before. And I'm not a rookie. So I think that if that's true for me, there's got to be at least one or maybe two or three other people who could benefit from a revisiting of complex or intermediate topics, custom menus, like what's to know? Well, as of yesterday, I learned something.
No question that core programming techniques that can be revisited and readapted, or just reshape or remind us what we should be doing, those are always good. And you know, we've always been sort of the volunteer. First and foremost, what I would say, Tony, if you don't know much about FMDiSC, if you want to hear a topic, tell us about it. And number two, if you want to hear a topic, more likely than not, we're going to ask you to do the presentation on it.
I was just going to say, didn't Tony just volunteer to do a custom menu presentation?
That's right. That's all I heard, is that Tony White wants to present at a future meeting on custom menus. That's the only thing I heard out of that whole thing right there.
I got to vet it a little bit, but I've got some stuff coming up for another user group, so I got to figure out what's for where. But I certainly would like to do a presentation for you guys. I just gotta bring my A game to your group. That's for sure.
We appreciate you bringing your A game. We welcome B game and, you know, C game on occasion and so forth.
We don't have a B game here.
But from that standpoint, yeah, that's the other thing we constantly, you are not going to hear the board of FMDiSC go, that's a stupid idea. We don't want to, you know, we want your input. We need you to help give us bumper, you know, guardrails to go, hey, wow, this is getting a little too deep for me, or we haven't really been back over here in a while. We need this feedback. That's why we're dedicating this time right here to this particular topic. So thank you for those thoughts. Love to hear your ideas on when you might want to do something on custom menus. And Tony, the other thing, you can go out to our groups IO, you know, our chat room and go, hey, I'm thinking about custom menus. Does somebody want to co-present? Does somebody else have some cool ideas? We can bring in 2 or 3 people together about that. So I want to, there's all sorts of ways that we can do these things.
Yeah, and also Dave, let me just give you guys a shout out on your group IO is really pretty terrific, and I'll let you in on an inside secret. Scott Rose said you should present at the LA group. I did a presentation pre-recording days, and I did it partly, you know, for the love of humanity, and also to just get on your mailing list. It's a really good user group you got there. The mailing list you have is really awesome.
Yeah, we've always tried. It's not as active as it's been in the past, as Lynn was alluding. We just kind of saw a little, you know, kind of a historical, quieter amount of percolation on there. Even though our membership has grown, we don't have quite as much communication. But we've always prided ourselves in it's pretty low noise. You raise your hand if you have a question, 5 or 6 smart people come in with some suggestions, and you wipe the chalk off your hands and off to another day. So I think our members need to remember this is a really helpful group. And if you do have a problem, raise your hand and go into that group. And that's where you fill in the gaps of between the meetings or something I don't quite understand or something I'm struggling with or troubleshooting. So don't feel like it's not a great avenue. It is. Mr. Chris Moyer, I see your hand raised.
How you doing? I wanted to, I guess, first of all, echo that, to me, the pandemic had a huge silver lining that all these user groups that, prior to the pandemic were almost exclusively in person went virtual. And I've never felt closer to the FileMaker community or more in touch with what's going on. We've attended user groups in the UK and all over the country. And so it's been great to sort of see people that I used to only see once a year at like DevCon and stuff like that. So I think it's a huge benefit. But one thing that the FMBug folks over in the UK do, Gary Palmer usually does this, is kind of a roundup of the FileMaker news over the past month, because they do it once a month. And it's not just here's what happened, here's what happened, here's what happened. He almost acts as a commentator. It's like, here's what happened and here's what I think it means. And so it's always interesting to sort of hear someone else's perspective on, their take of an event that happened in the community. Obviously there was a lot of news this past month. And so I always find that refreshing. I don't think too many other, if any other user groups do something like that, but that would be a suggestion for a possible ad.
I like that.
Because
I like
you guys
that.
are right there on the doorstep of the mothership. So you should have the inside track.
I mean, if we're, we just got a small taste of that with Mr. Blackwell talking about Apple and Microsoft and et cetera, using Federation and so forth. Yeah, there is a potential to kind of distill what's going on around us and let the group, Lynn did just a bit ago, anybody have any announcements? So that's sort of, hey, we're hiring, by the way, we are hiring another web developer, if anybody knows anybody. But also, hey, look what the Wedge announced this last week. And oh my God, it's not the Wedge anymore, Dave, shut up. It's it's a different building. But look at all these changes that have just hit our doorsteps and what do these things mean? And of course, we're going to be dedicating a lot of time to that over the coming months, I would imagine. But you're right, Chris, just a kind of synopsis of what's going on in the industry around us, in case you haven't heard, and what some of those meanings or implications are. I think that's a great idea.
It'll always be the wedge in our hearts.
Yeah. I got Roman with a hand up. How you doing, Roman?
Not bad. On the topic of high bar and low bar, and is a topic like custom menus ripe for a group like this? I cannot think of any time that any topic has been presented where I didn't potentially have something to gain just from watching others use it. And I can think of a couple of examples that have hit the entire group. Layout variables. A year or two ago, we watched a presentation from somebody and he was just doing something rather benign. And here he did his method of layout variables and everyone in the room said, oh, wait, do that again. For something very simple that he was doing with layouts. I think of about 4 months ago, you cleaned up the file that you were working on by exporting all the data, zapping the field, and re-importing to clean up everything.
Right.
I didn't learn anything new in how to operate FileMaker, but by watching somebody else and picking up a step, it's like, God almighty. So would I potentially benefit from something so mundane or something so benign sounding as custom menus? Sure, possibly.
Yeah.
And maybe everyone else could as well. So I don't ever think that I have seen any sort of presentation or tips that have been given where I didn't appreciate the part about seeing somebody else use it. And several times I have picked up something that I thought, oh my God, how come I never thought of that? That's so obvious.
Yeah, I think two things I want to say about that. Very first DevCon session, and this is very ironic because she's sitting right here. Very first DevCon session I ever did, I think it was in Palm Desert, and it was like 2001 or something like that. And I did a session, and my good friend Lynn Allen was sitting there, And I pulled her aside after my session, and I'd worked very hard putting all this content together. And I said, did you learn anything new? And she said something to me that sort of I took away as bad, but it's actually quite good. She's like, I didn't learn anything new, but I felt really good that I was doing the same things that you were. That's validation. So even from a standpoint of somebody going, here's how I work with portals, you go, wow, that's interesting. I do the same thing, or I do it differently. And we're such an opinionated group here, and we have such an open forum that I like what you did there. Here's something I do that's a little bit different. I think when somebody does a presentation here, it invites commentary and either applause or I have a slightly different way, or I like that. That's going to be my new way of doing something. I think that's valuable. And to the second, part of that is when you do a presentation, there's a lot of people that like to come in and go, I have completely circled the wagon on this topic and I know everything perfect and this is the best way to do it. That you got some smart people in the audience here, and there's going to be some people that can shoot you down if you come in with that approach. I think it's very appropriate to go, here is why I do this, because it makes sense to me or because it helps me. We can sit there and look at Russ Kohn's capabilities of passing all this rich data around. And some of us are going to go, oh my God, it's so brilliant, it's so simple. And other people are going to go, that adds a lot of extra upfront, organization and complexity for some gains down the road. It doesn't mean that either one of those is right or wrong, but it stimulates our thoughts on this and leads us to some new ground. So that's a good thing as well. When we talk about content delivery, this is not what we're talking about, but how we're executing the content, right? So we just watched Russ do a presentation. I'm the expert on this topic. I'm going to show you something. But we've also, one of the things I've really liked that we've done in the last year and a half or so, we've done some nice interviews. We got, Rick Kalman in here talking a bit, and we've got Heather Winkle, who's gone on to an entirely different industry, but still has her foothold in design. We've had some really interesting conversations with Molly Connolly and Susan Fenema and others in our industry. These are really great sort of dives into a person's head, how they got to where they are, what their career is, what they like to think about. So we have that. We did a panel recently with some platinum members a couple of meetings ago. We're doing at this very moment sort of a brokered conversation, but it's a roundtable. We want everybody raising their hands and talking on this. And then at our board meeting, one of the things that Lynn talked about, which we haven't done in a long time, and we've only done a few times, is that developer dilemma. Here's this system I built. It's got an inherent rub spot or something. I'm not quite sure how to solve it. Let's bring it to the group, which takes an immense amount of courage to do that. But I'm a developer. I struggle with trying to decide what to do here. Let me bring it to the group and let's see if everybody can help me come up with some useful suggestions. So these are meant to be bullet points to help stimulate the conversation. Does anybody have something here that they prefer or dislike more or less than the others? And the room goes quiet.
Well, I've never seen an interview at a meetup. So I'd be kind of curious how that goes.
I've enjoyed the interviews that have been done.
Yeah, Lynn just did one last meeting, right, Lynn, with Molly, which was fantastic.
Oh,
Yeah.
Wonderful conversation.
I think the interviews have been great. I mean, that's something that we hadn't, when we had the in-person meetings, we didn't really do much in the way of those kind of interviews. And I think, especially given that we can pull people who have left the industry but sort of are part of our family, I think that's been a really fantastic ad.
And again, we're all talking about the connection to people we don't get from being in person. This is just two people talking and the rest of us going, oh, wow. You know what I mean? It's a more human feeling thing. And one of the other things I got to tell you folks, if I'm grabbing somebody like Susan Fenema or Bob's grabbing Heather Winkle, Heather's a vice president at Capital One. If she's got to put together slides and talking points and all that sort of stuff, That's a big ask. That's a big lift. I got to say that when I'm grabbing Rick Kallman and talking with him, I'm going, how many years have you been at FileMaker and what's one of your favorite parts about the job? This is cocktail napkin stuff. This is stuff that the attendee doesn't have to exert a lot of effort. And we get really candid and open and human responses to these things, which I think are great. So if I'm hearing from the peanut gallery right now, I have to say, both from the execution standpoint and from the attendee standpoint, I've enjoyed the interviews. I've enjoyed some of the panels. I always enjoy a good roundtable.
Yeah, I wanted to say that I like this variety because I think it does get more participation and brings us closer together than just presentation.
Yeah,
where
shut
it's
up and
question
listen
and
to me.
answers. And so I think, again, a variety of, this time it's presentation, next time it's interview. And I think that has made these meetings for me to attend more exciting. So I love it.
That's great.
I'd like to add a vote for the developer dilemma. I'm in some mastermind groups with other CEOs, and it's been really helpful just to tap into the wisdom of other CEOs or other companies. And we have a tremendous brain trust here that I don't know if we're fully taking advantage of. That it would be really interesting to explore that a little bit more, of how usually the way it goes is you have 5 or 10, 20 minutes to present something that's going on in your business, and then you get 6 or 7 people just giving you feedback and from different points of view. That the wealth of information or experience that we have in this group, I think we could tap into it a little bit more. I don't necessarily think it necessarily has to be a developer dilemma, but you could just have some, break us into groups and have different topics, or people could just go around the circle, give everyone a chance to just talk about what's going on in their business or what's going on in with some client or something like that, and get feedback on how they would handle it, or different perspectives on how you would deal with different situations that you're having in your business and your programming.
And that other aspect, that harnessing the group think, the brain trust, Alan, that also, again, that bifurcates to both the meeting time of one person going, hi, I want everybody to, I got 10 minutes, I'm going to tell you about a problem with my business. We can do some of that where appropriate, but that's also a huge benefit of Groups.io. For somebody to go, we just saw Chris Gaunt a couple of weeks ago. Oh, I'm struggling with this, and Wim de Court said, check the logs, because that's what Wim says, right? But from that standpoint, we got a lot of people raising their hands and suggesting things and so forth. So I think that the chat is also a really great avenue to take to raise your hand when you're struggling with something, because not only do you get some answers and input. Right now we have 40 people here. We may have 250 people that read through that list over the course of a couple of days or whatever. People get to think about it, mull on it a little bit, and come back with some thoughts. So I think that's great.
Alan, sorry, Dave.
No, go.
Alan, you just kind of jogged something in my mind, which is always dangerous, but you were talking about breaking into smaller groups, and I thought, well, one thing about breaking into smaller groups is that when you use breakout rooms, it's not getting recorded, right? So the benefit of what everybody learns just kind of disappears into the ether, and that seems a little problematic to me. But I just realized that with the format that we're doing now, we have our monthly meeting, and certainly our monthly meeting is important, but there's nothing to say that this group couldn't put together some like subgroups as well, that could meet, like a business group that meets on a regular basis with X number of people. You need to sign up, and only so many people can be there at a time to keep the conversation reasonable, because even with 40 people, sometimes the conversation can be pretty difficult. If everybody, is there actually to talk, came with that intention, right? Things could be done, because the reason why we only had our FMDiSC meeting once a month was it's really hard to put content together for us. The board is, we're all always kind of scrambling for content when it comes around to our turn to run a meeting. But also, all these people have to travel from all over the place to go, and you can't expect that, right? It's too much to ask for people to do that, more often than once a month. We're not doing that anymore. Everybody's doing it from the comfort of their office. So, a lot of things about this format have freed us up to do things differently, and we haven't taken advantage of some of them that much, but we can, like shorter presentations or shorter content. Meetings don't necessarily have to be 3 hours long, because again, you're not justifying, well, we made all those people drive all that way, we better give them, X amount of time, right? Instead, you can, well, I've only got 2 hours and 20 minutes. So that's how long this meeting's going to be. And that's okay, because, it doesn't matter really, as long as the content was good. So, there's a lot of things that this lends itself to. I think one of the things that this format does not lend itself to as well is the roundtable format, which we're doing right now, and we're doing a fine job of it. And we've got the hand raised, and that helps. But it's not the same thing as having a bunch of people together in a room having a discussion. It's just not. And so, especially when you get, again, to that much larger group. But anyway, I just kind of rambled on there.
Well,
I'm
I like
just
that.
doing
I
a
like
brain
that.
dump of a bunch of things that occurred to me as people were speaking.
One of the,
So
one of
there
the
you go.
things that we do in this group is, like, once a month they have called sales lab, or sales and marketing. So, you focus on all your sales issues. People come, bring up their different issues, and talk about all different strategies of sales. We could also do something on products. A lot of people want to develop a product or have lots of ideas for products. We could have a lab on, how do you create a FileMaker product and make it work or sale. Or, there's like lots of ways we could tap into our group, have, once a month meetings on different focuses that would be of interest to people now that we have the Zoom. I go to, all these things are on Zoom, but it's just another way of accessing the intelligence or the experience of all the members.
I think,
I like that.
I think, I'm sorry. I think I want to see there being an overflow of topics before we start splintering the content of the main meetings. That's the only thing I would sit there and say is we always want to have enough content for the meetings. And if we start getting, oh my gosh, we've got 5 or 10 presentations, let's break those into, mid-month splinter groups or whatever, because I don't necessarily have deep need to discover product specific stuff in FileMaker, but I absolutely want to see a presentation on it. You know what I mean? So from that standpoint, I feel like I've got skin in that game. So I want to get to Vince, who's been raising his hand for a bit, and then
all right, Vince,
what you got?
Hey, thank you, David. Just going back to your comment about before COVID and after COVID. So yeah, we're all kind of adjusting to this new landscape, and it's great to see more engagement and respect among us as a community. I would also like to reflect on what we used to do, which was, as you well know, David, the West Coast tour. Started in Portland, go to Seattle, go to Dig FM, and then head down to LA, right? So, what if we rethink this? What if, maybe the whatever you're going to call the FMDiSC group, the FMDiSC group is maybe more focused on a certain area of the platform. Maybe Tony's group in New York is more focused on some other aspects, and not kind of have the same topic go around from group to group, right? So maybe one group is again more business oriented, another group has got another aspect to it. Some other things to consider rather than just the same content on every group, and a speaker goes from group to group, especially seeing as this opens up the opportunity, like you said, many people from different areas of the world are now participating. So it's interesting to look at it from different perspectives, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's true. You know, when you really sit back, Vince, and look at all of the content being created across all the groups and so forth, there's a lot of rich content. Every once in a while, we'll peek over our shoulders and go, what's SOFA doing? And what's Dig FM doing? And how's the New York group? We'll do a little bit of that. And there used to be a little bit of coordination, but kind of hard to do that full scale. But I like the fact that, you know, one thing that's really interesting to me is Claris did this big giant rollout about Studio and the problem solver circle and so forth. And there's still people in this room of 40 that hadn't heard everything. And Andy and Rosemary coming here and replanting that flag, even in this small context, reaches into further little cracks of the community, right? So even if you do the same presentation at 5 different developer groups, you're gonna reach people differently than just by doing one or trying to get overlap. But your point is well taken. There's a lot of great content. Maybe we can look at coordinating a little more and borrowing from each other, or covering areas that one group is stronger at that the other is not. So, Rosemary, you've been waiting patiently.
All right. Well, I just had a couple ideas that like popped into my head as I've been listening to the conversation. So the first is, you know, just the overall like variety of groups. It's been really fun for me as, you know, community engagement lead at Claris, watching all the groups and seeing what they're doing. And, you know, going to the West Coast tour idea. One thing that I think it was Chris and Heidi did when we did Claris Corner with them earlier this year is they actually brought together the Michigan, Milwaukee, Chicago, and Minneapolis groups for a single meeting.
For a regional kind of, yeah.
We kind of did like so the Claris Corner was kind of a regional meeting. So that was interesting. The other thing I had is you were talking about the subgroups, and this comes from the fiber arts, the weaving guild world that I am also a part of, is they have the concept of study groups. So for 6 months or a year, a small group of the guild will go off and go deep on some topic. And then
Like 6 months on one kind of wool.
Or for example, or one weave structure or whatever. But then at the end of that, part of their responsibility is to come back and present what they learned and what they discovered to the broader group. You know, so taking that example of the product group going deep or a business group going deep, you know, you maybe have those groups, but they are, if they're going to do that, then they have to come back once a quarter or once every 6 months and
update the mothership.
Update the broader group. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to back that up, Dave, that those breakout groups where people bring the content rather than we seek content, they are actually going to be content generators rather than content consumers. That content for our larger meetings will come out of those groups rather than vanishing within. So that kind of goes along with what Rosemary was saying.
I see, and so I just want to kind of reintroduce this slide where, you know, we talk about interviews and so forth. This is sort of just a style. Like today we saw Russ really go into a how-to deep dive. How did I build this system and how does it work and all that? We've all seen the case studies. Here's a great customer story that one of us shares. Lynn, unfortunately, it looks like you have a tip and trick that we're going to try to, are we doing that today or are you punting to the next meeting?
We're punting to sometime. I mean, next meeting I'm going to be heavily medicated. So.
Okay. A review is somebody, you know, doing legwork on a brand new thing that they can bring to the whole team and so forth. So these are also just sort of shoot out. I want to compare X to Y, you know, or this plugin with this plugin or this product with this product. These are all other approaches as well. I still see Roman and Tony with their hands up, but I also see John Langer. John, you had some thoughts?
Yeah, just a quick comment. I know it's probably unnerving for presenters when things don't work right, but one of the things I really appreciate is when a demonstration is showing, you know, code under the hood, they're, you know, actually tweaking and typing things and something doesn't go right. And that helps me watching their process of troubleshooting, and it keeps me more engaged, like, ooh, he made a typo, is he going to find it? So maybe that's just the way my brain works, but I really appreciate that part.
It's interesting you say that. Like when one of the things that we do when we've interviewed candidates at Angel City Data, we give them a problem. And even if it's just a whiteboard and a pen, I want to hear how somebody gets to the finish line. You know, it's very interesting to hear the path or how somebody thinks through what they're going to do and verbalize that, whether they're doing the code or solving the problem. Just hearing how people adapt or address certain issues is always interesting to me. So one of the other things, just in broad strokes, you know, we've also got our meetup presence. It's been, you know, it's a nice framework that allows us to throw our flag into a greater pool of more discoverable, easier to share. It's got some built-in, kind of baked-in examples. We don't use it, you know, for all of our discussions and so forth. It's really more of a off-ramp on the internet to go, this is FMDiSC. We really haven't done, the board has talked quite a bit. We've got fmdisc.org. We've got a cranky little old page that nobody's touched in years. It feels like Meetup really is sort of our more easy to discover area for people that hook into us. But if anybody has any thoughts about Meetup or things that we need to do or should do with it, we welcome those. And then finally, our groups.io. We've got this pretty good platform that allows us to, as the board members, allows us to add new members, allows us to kind of curate content and manage file uploads and all that sort of stuff. And it's free and it's been reasonably good. I don't know that we have a lot of problems with it as a tool of this group, but if anybody has any specific, hey, I've used it before in another group and we use this feature or that feature. Again, there's a number of board members here and we try to do the best with what we have every month. But if anybody has any suggestions on how to improve our chat room or anything that we should or shouldn't be doing differently, love to hear those things. And then finally, that's sort of, from an agenda standpoint in terms of topics and the tools and all that sort of stuff. So the in-person meetings, which of course Jonathan and Lynn both talked about, I think we all miss seeing each other and having that warmth and that naturalness and that Bob talking about the benefit of those roundtable discussions in an open room where we can hear the various rumblings of our colleagues and so forth. I think it is a good thing. What does anybody have, as the board, we have kicked around a couple of ideas, maybe we do a quarterly back at BRISC or something along those lines. But again, the benefit to some extent, the minute we go to BRISC, we've got to go, okay, now we're going to do Zoom. Rosemary's going to present. We got to set up AV and all of this other stuff has to happen because the people in the audience have to hear and be able to interact with the person on stage. So there's some issues there too. But anybody have any particular questions or thoughts? One of the other things that we've thought about, having the meetings on Zoom, they're recordable, they're easy to prepare, we can have international content, but having non-topic centric meetings. Hey, everybody, we're going to be at this park in mid-city LA. We're all, bring a cup of coffee. We're all going to just hang out, bring our dogs or our kids or whatever. Is there other avenues or other types of face-to-face meetings that are going to be viable? I see Tony with his hand up. Tony.
Yeah, just a couple quick, hopefully closing thoughts from me. One of the things I'm learning from going to other groups is how they approach it differently. Your breakout rooms is brilliant. I'm trying to get other groups to do that. Some of the groups have this feature that they do, Michigan, or where they meet afterwards, or they hang out afterwards. Like the meeting's over, it doesn't have a hard out, and it's not mandatory, but it's like the social hour. Brighton says, go grab a glass of wine or whatnot. SOFA does it a lot. Dig FM, once we hung out for like 3 hours. Michigan or the Midwest group, because they often combine, they do that. And I think that might address some of the things that people are talking about because it's more social. And it could spin into whatever. Anyone who's got the stamina to stay until the last person standing. Anyway, that's all I got.
Got it. Stephen, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you, David. One thought about the concept of the hybrid meeting, and it's sort of ridiculous in a way for me to be the one saying this with those Grammy Awards hanging on the wall behind you, but you can't just, if you're going to have a hybrid meeting, you can't just stick a camera and a microphone in front of the people in the room, the speakers, the audience, and have an effective meeting. And we've seen some examples of organizations that have done just that. And it's not a very good experience for the people who are virtual. I have some information about that I can send you, but it deals with things such as audio visual, table placement, angles of the cameras, all of that type of thing that make an effective meeting. Also, there's a company called OneVenue, OneVenue.com, that specializes in doing a number of these things. But if we have hybrid meetings, and certainly as one who would have to get on the airplane to come to Southern California, which I sort of enjoy doing anyway, it's important that we be able to feel as if we are participating in the live portion, the in-person portion of the meeting, that we can see and hear the people, and conversely, that the people in the room can see and hear us.
Yeah, there's, so whether we do, drinks afterwards and hey, everybody, we're gonna do a Zoom meeting, be at your desktop, and then in a half an hour after, we're gonna meet at such and such a bar or a restaurant or something, or whether we're all together. I tend to side with what Bob said earlier, that there's just good energy in the room when we're all together, especially when we're doing things of a round table nature, things that invite participation and so forth. So Anton, what you got?
Quickly unmute myself. I want to, first of all, give a thumbs up to the breakout room roulette. I think that has been, as a silver lining, if we're going to be in a Zoom format, I think that's been really fun. I've actually had a personal benefit from it in the sense of getting a chance to, by happenstance, 4 times in a row, I had Christian from Monkey Bread Software in my breakout room, and it actually helped me solve a problem, because I was like, okay, well, he knows me. I can reach out to him at, I don't know, Dark 100 in Germany. But also, I also would like to say that there is something to be said for the in-person nature of it. I don't know, I don't have a solution for it, but I think that part of the collegiality that we all have in this group has stemmed from the fact that for years we were all there and like going, okay, where's that Korean place is closed? Where would we go now for lunch? Or that little or what we'd have, the round table over the snacks, that kind of thing. And I think that for us to preserve, all of you out there in TV land are beneficiaries of that collegiality, which I think it's great. And I think that we got to figure out a way to continue to sustain and build on that somehow. I don't have a solution.
Hugs. I miss my hugs.
Yes.
Yeah.
I can't wait until I do that.
I think Dave mentioned one idea earlier, which was, we all meet, for like social time. It could be a daytime thing, it could be a nighttime thing, it could be
weekend,
whatever.
Yeah.
Weekend. Yeah. It could, we could take a poll on that. But what do you guys think in general about that? Does anybody have any reservations about that? I know that right now it's kind of hard because, we haven't reached the endemic phase yet, right? It's still technically in a pandemic phase, and we're still, struggling a little bit, and there's still the possibility of more mask wearing and so forth. And so, there's a lot of uncertainty, but setting that aside, assuming in a perfect world, we do reach that endemic phase, is there any, what do we do? The 25th anniversary a while back of FMDiSC, and attendance was good, but it wasn't by far everyone who's ever, all the regulars weren't there.
Yeah, I would I would say we had, Bob, when we first started Zoom, there was a built up thirst. We had 80, 85 people showing up. You know, our last number of FMDiSC meetings at Percy were 25-ish in that general realm. We've got, you know, almost double that on a meeting today. So that's, to your point, you know, if we said, hey, next month it's going to be FMDiSC, we might get 35 people that come, but the next one might get 15 or 20 too. So, you know, we've got to, if we're going to do something, we want to make sure, you know, if we build it, they will come.
Well, I think that there might be something to having social Zoom sessions where we have minimal, if any, FileMaker content and just, you know, bring a glass of wine and sit around and shoot the shit. Like,
we do that once a month at ACD with our team. Like anybody who can Friday afternoon, we're gonna eat lunch together. We don't talk about work at all. And the very first meeting we had, everybody was like, wow, I learned so much about my coworkers that have been working with me for 8 years I didn't even know about.
Right. And I think we might combine that even with the specific breakout sessions. Other times during the month, they could be in the evening, they could be on the weekend. You want to come and talk about your business problems or your, you know, developer dilemma problems. And as the person who's done that the most, I think, bringing developer problems to the group. I mean, Rosemary talking about an artist group. It's like artist critique. You have to be able to bring something that's not finished, that you're not satisfied with, and show it to the group and expose yourself, and then accept that the criticism that comes along with it, but also you get the most valuable input ever. It's happened to me every time. I've gotten so much good information out of it, and trying to get other people to be that brave and do that is difficult, but it's so valuable. And I think the group really enjoys it. I think people love to help other people. And we could combine these breakout sessions, which I think are going to produce in the end more content for our larger sessions, with the social thing. Okay, now get out your wine, or bring the wine from the beginning. God knows what we'll come up with in the middle of that. So.
Yeah, I don't know about any of you, but I've been to a lot of dev cons with a lot of you. I like a lot of you better with alcohol. I'm just going to say that.
Alcohol and you.
And you were in them.
Yeah.
Well, I think it probably maybe goes one way, both ways. Rosemary likes everybody with alcohol. I'll just say that. She's very, 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 very collegiate when she's, you know what? I think we've gotten some good, I'm filling up a notepad with really good feedback from you guys today. And I know the rest of the board members are paying close attention. I don't think we're going to wave a wand and go, boom, we've solved everything. But I think we're getting good suggestions and feedback and input. So I would just say, you know, we have a week after every FMDiSC meeting, the board members get together, we hash out, what did we learn? What did we do? How did the presentations go? What do we need to do better? What do we have for next month? What about the month after? So we do a lot of that. We spend a lot of time on this between meetings, but you guys have given us a lot of things to think about. The only thing I would ask, let us percolate and distill all this down. We're probably going to be doing a little more outreach, maybe some surveys or things of that nature, to kind of get a fix on what the consensus is of 2 or 3 different types of things that we can offer, and kind of go from there, I think. I don't know if there's anything else, Lynn, that you need to have in terms of closing out the meeting, but we're hitting the 1 o'clock mark right this moment.
I'm going to say that next month is Bob Shockey's meeting, and he will, of course, be welcoming any content that people may want to contact him with. Obviously, if you can't do it next month, if you have something, Tony, pick a month and we'll fit you in. So I want to thank everyone for coming and contributing.
Thanks again, Russ. Great presentation.
Russ, great. Andy's
Yeah,
gone.
great job, Russ.
Andy, tell him thank you, Rosemary. We really appreciated it. I saw in a comment, somebody said, well, that's the most cogent explanation of problem solver circle I've seen yet. So
yeah, he was really enjoying this conversation because he too really cares deeply about community, but he had to answer the phone and talk to Brad Freitag. So that's why we lost him.
Okay. He's welcome at any meeting, obviously. So I am going to close down the meeting and thank you, everyone. We hope to see you next month.